For today's inaugural show, we have an icon of GovCon M&A, Bob Kipps, the founder of KippsDeSanto, the legendary M&A firm which specializes in aerospace, defense, and technology. We're very excited to talk to the great Bob Kipps. This is GovCon M&A Talk, presented by Orange Slices. I'm Sharon Heaton of SB Liftoff, and I live and breathe GovCon M&A. So let's talk deals. Bob, great to be with you. So Kipps and DeSanto is known for doing big GovCon deals, but when you started the firm, the first deal you did, I think, was small. Can you tell us about that story?
Yeah, still getting over a little bit of the introduction, but yeah, thank you, Sharon, for introduction and agreeing to have me on. So, yes, we've talked in the past. Me and my colleagues have been doing M&A and GovCon aerospace defense world for over 25 years. I've stopped counting at that, and are originally at a previous firm. And I'm just to back up, I'm a Washington native, kind of grew up in the defense industry. My father was a defense litigator, GovCon litigator, government contracts lawyer. And so I kind of grew up around the industry, knew it. My previous firm, I was there for 11 years at William Loki, there through a transaction in and of itself, and kind of helped kind of start their M&A practice there. And and Kevin and I joke, our first deal there was smaller than when we first started that M&A practice, smaller than probably a third of our fees are now on transactions. And so, but we got started. I was in the late 90s, and then started KippsDeSanto again about a year after that company went through a transaction, and had a lot of fun. So we started at KippsDeSanto in 2007, grew it, and survived through the financial crisis, which was about a year after we started the firm, and continued to kind of grow the firm. And then ourselves, as we started doing larger transactions, saw private equity's influence in the sector becoming larger and larger, thought that we might be more valuable for our clients as not being a boutique any longer. And so in 2019, we went through the surreal experience of interviewing banks like Sharon's and ours, and hiring one. And putting ourselves on the market and going through kind of almost the same process we put our clients through. And so I get asked the question, still get asked the question 5 years after doing a transaction, did you guys hire somebody? It's like, yes, of course I hired somebody. I would have felt like a hypocrite. And honestly, there was enormous value proposition. The firm that we hired was an expert in sort of financial services M&A. They knew the rules of the road. They knew what the right parameters and criteria and who the buyers were, just the same kind of things that we talk to our clients about. And they added a tremendous amount of value, in addition to knowing that Capital One, who ended up being the buyer of our business, was interested in growing an M&A business. We had been in a building where Capital One had 2/3 of the floors and had done business with Capital One, and were a long golf shot from their headquarters, and had absolutely no idea that they were interested in starting an M&A business. And so, again, there was enormous value proposition out of that. And so we're, almost 5.5 years into that journey post transaction, and it's been a great combination. And so hope that kind of gives you a little bit of preamble. It's been not just an M&A banker, but someone that's kind of hired an M&A banker as well, and tried to not meddle, and also had to manage all the other decisions that clients have to go through about when to tell people, who to bring into the fold, how to manage a business and grow a business with partners, and kind of manage through a transaction, and then manage kind of the communication about the rationale and the fit and everything afterwards too. And so it's been a great combination, and look forward to talking more about it.
Well, it's truly fascinating because you've really been on all sides of this. On one hand, you joined a big company and you helped grow practice there. Then you did a startup and you grew that startup, and then you sold that startup. What surprised you about being the client selling your company versus being the M&A advisor who is, of course, advising everybody else?
Well, there weren't an enormous number of surprises. The surprises were learning about what deals look like, financial services transactions look like. We know the innards of how government contracts and aerospace defense deals, and we know the rules of the road and the parameters and the right add backs and what buyers are interested in. It was a completely different set of things that buyers of M&A firms were looking for. And we thought we had a good sense, and we weren't completely off, but the parameters of that were much different. And so, like I said, part of that was, how to present our numbers, and our performance. And we we would never present ourselves in the same way if we were doing it ourselves. And so that was it was really valuable, and it made us feel better about that decision about hiring a banker than if they just come in and said, hey, yeah, you're doing everything the same, just kind of show up for these management presentations. That kind of stuff we weren't surprised, and felt pretty prepared for. It was really how to present your business and what they're looking for. And we were in a good position that at that time, we had completed about 100 transactions as a firm before we sold. We've now done 140, so a little more since we sold. And we had a team of partners, most of which are still here 5.5 years later, that were still mid-career. And so it wasn't kind of the M&A firm that was all people kind of looking to retire and had already bought their place in Sarasota. This was someone and it factored into who we selected too. It was a firm that still had a lot of energy left in it. And we found a firm, Capital One, much larger, but that was we were a new product line for them. And this wasn't just being I'll say jammed into an org chart where there was an open space. And so this was allowed our entrepreneurial journey to continue. And it's, even though very like-minded values between the two firms, there's still a large identity for KippsDeSanto here 5.5 years later.
There still remains a very significant identity for Kipps and DeSanto. So being a entity by a larger company has not had that change. Now, I think a lot of people think that, hey, listen, Bob Kipps, he's been a lucky man. He went from one success to another success. Tell the story. You started the company, I believe, just before the financial crisis. What was it like to have a startup in financial services dealing with M&A at a time that the bottom falls out of the market? What happened and how did you guys deal with that?
Yeah, we started the business May 1 of 2007. And so as people might remember, things started sort of the financing, the housing crisis and the subprime loan debt situation was starting to happen. But, and we get asked this question, so it's kind of a good question for you to ask me. We asked this question: what's the market going to be like in 25 or 26?
We're going to talk about that.
Talk about but it's so it's like, well, my crystal ball doesn't go out more than a year, clearly, because we started a firm in spring of 2007, and the financial crisis, the bottom fell out of it in the summer and fall of 2008. And it was tricky. I mean, we were at first, the difficulties in the market were helpful as we were recruiting and building 4 of us started KippsDeSanto, all from our previous firm. But as we started intentionally adding from other places, there were more people on the street as Wall Street was laying off people heading into the financial crisis. And so, and we were fortunate, we were very fortunate we had our first 4 deals close starting on July 15th of 2008. And so it
Wow.
was, and then 2 more in early August. And if it weren't for that, KippsDeSanto would have been gone. If those deals had slid 2 or 3 months, because we had probably 6 other deals that were either exclusive or very far along. And come September 15th, when AIG's bad news came out, and the market just dropped like 30% in the second half of 2008. All those deals died. And so immediately, we went from a firm that was all contingent fee, all closing fee based. And if we hadn't closed those first 4, that carried us all the way through until May of 2009 when our next deal closed. It was almost like we had to restart the business. The one thing that was, and for people that may not remember, those were in economically much scarier times than the COVID, which you went through then. I mean, it was different. It was health recently versus economy there, but there was just fear about whether you could go draw money out of your ATM, and there was all the lending had come to a stop, and the market was dropping, and housing was dropping, and foreclosures were happening, and it was just a very fearful time. And as I said, Wall Street was laying off people beginning in 2007, which initially was very helpful as we were building the firm, and we had grown to probably 15 people by the time the market really got bad in the middle of 2008. And we made the decision to not lay anybody off, even though we knew it was going to be painful. And Kevin and Mark and I made the decision like, hey, we're just going to go through and cut all the senior people's comp down, and the senior people are going to suck it up, and we're going to get through this. And so because we felt, first of all, we knew these people, a lot of them very, very well, and there was no place for them to go. And so that built, and no one was hiring, everyone was laying off, and we had put a lot of time into building the right people. And so it was really probably the scariest business moment in my life, was getting through that time period. And so, because we'd already put the money we were going to put into it to get us to those first couple closings. And so it was, but it ended up building, it ended up enhancing our culture, building up the employees were very appreciative of it. And we just, came out full bore, ready to roll after in the summer of 2009 when the market kind of got back on track. But it was a real moment. And we've joked about this. You meet any entrepreneur, and if they're honest with you, they'll never say success is a straight line. And ours clearly has not been. I mean, we grew dramatically from 2009 to 2019, but it wasn't a straight line. There were some ups and downs and high anxiety moments, and it does provide a common sort of kindred spirit with a lot of our entrepreneurial clients.
When you go through the battles together, it really does kind of create a bonding that otherwise couldn't be there. So now let's talk about 2025. We're now in January of 25. What are your predictions about what's going to be happening? We've got a new president who's talking about what's going to be changes to the federal government. How do you think that the government contracting market, and specifically government contracting market M&A, is going to be changing in 25?
It is going to be different. And we've already seen a major adjustment in public company valuations here since the election. And I'd say they're a proxy for maybe setting up this conversation. They have traded down as a group, probably 25% since early November. And that being said, 25% down since early November, but up still almost 20% for the year. And so, I went back and looked at what were multiples at the end of 23 for the Khakis and Leidos and Booz and Parsons and the kind of the public government services groups. And they're almost identical at the end of 23 as they were at the end of 24. And so as much uncertainty as there is about Doge and what's coming, and there is uncertainty. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Let's not lose track of they're still trading at strong multiples that are well above the longer term averages. Now, what's going to be my crystal ball for the next administration, M&A, not just 25, but beyond, is back up to Trump 1 and Biden. And Trump 1, I think it'll be a lot closer to Trump 1 than it was during Biden. Trump 1 was much more oriented towards defense and intelligence. While there weren't dramatic cuts on the civilian side, it wasn't where buyers were looking to invest during that time. Biden was the Biden administration, in part at the end of Trump with health and COVID. It was almost a rising tide across all budgets, all civilian, intel, and defense. That's unusual. And so the kind of Pollyannish, optimistic side of me says change is always positive for M&A, because M&A is the tool of repositioning for the larger companies. And so in some respects, a rising tide across all budgets has reduced the need for larger companies to do M&A, because there's no repositioning necessary when everything is going up. Now, we're going to see a market both based on the administration's priorities as well as just fiscal realities, where there's going to be winners and losers. And so if you're thinking about, I think, as you're thinking about where M&A is going to be, it's going to be in the areas which are going to be getting continued budget growth or programmatic growth. And so, right now Trump has kind of got his eye focused on the civilian side, but it's also probably some more staff augmentation type companies or programs. I think, the back to office movement is going to be maybe a short-term boost for some contractors, maybe backfilling some spots. But I would say DOGE is looking to use technology to reduce. They're not just looking to reduce programs. I think they're going to try to reduce some regulatory oversight programs, but you're also going to see the use of technology and efficiency to try to be more cost effective. And that's what private sector has been doing, always does. And again, they're usually ahead of the federal government anyways. And so, and I don't think people are going to be thinking the world's any safer either. And so I think intelligence and defense, especially space, cybersecurity, digital transformation, anything that's more tech enabled versus just labor, which again, are trends that you and I have seen already happening. I think those are going to be more what the capabilities that buyers are going to be looking to buy. And they're going to be laser focused on agencies that are looking to that are going to be either flat or growing versus getting cut. And who knows exactly how that's going to go as the appointment process finalizes and DOGE gets going down the road. But I'd say the areas that are in the bullseye of that could be divestiture candidates, units or business groups from the larger companies as they look to prune from the lower growth areas or shrinking areas. But I think that's going to be advantageous for companies that have those attributes that I just mentioned with customers that are going to be more secure. And I think that most secure are probably more certainly intelligence oriented as well as DoD.
As an M&A advisor, people are looking to hire you, but you also make decisions as to who you're going to take on and whether or not you're going to be successful. At this point, would you be taking on clients that are in the civilian sector in FedCiv, or are you looking primarily or exclusively in defense intelligence?
Now, it would be not exclusive, but I'd say we'd probably be looking at it with a more tighter aperture. Again, it would have to have kind of capabilities which we think are part of the solution. Again, I think some of these things, as you know, there's been initiatives like DOGE from almost every presidential candidate, every new president, so going back to the 60s and 70s. They're called different things, but it was whether it's the Golden Fleece Awards in the 70s or the Grace Report in the Reagan administration or Bill Clinton's Reinventing Government. All of those things are, it's sort of a political rhetoric, but it is a fresh set of eyes and ideas on how to do things, which I think is healthy. I think it's so continuity in an ever-changing sort of technology environment isn't really a great strategy. So I think it's a good thing to be kind of stepping back, thinking about things completely disconnected from obligations or sort of parameters, and seeing what the art of the possible is. And again, I think contractors, like they serve the private sector, large companies lean on contractors, whether the Bain and McKinsey's for strategy or the Accentures for implementing or IBM for implementing cloud initiatives. Contractors are going to be part of the solution versus part of the inertia or the bureaucracy. That's one kind of parameter we're looking at and whether or not it's, depending on the programs they're working on in the civilian world, if those are things that we think are enduring, I don't think that we would shy away from that as much as we might say, hey, a little bit of patience to kind of see where some of the dust settles might make sense. And in a lot of cases, that might make sense. Going right now versus in February or March, or as things start settling out with the cabinet positions and some of the presidential agenda, makes sense for some clients. But we're looking at things, again, we're looking at winners and losers, and we're looking at change, and we're seeing M&A as the tool of change. And if someone is looking to get out because they're scared that their programs are at risk, that's probably not going to be a fit for us. If they look at it and say, hey, we are part of the solution, we are creating efficiency, it really may not matter who their customers are, unless the program is one of the ones that those are specifically eyeing. But if that's not the case, again, we're looking at who is part of the efficiency solution, because I think that's going to be a big point of emphasis. And it had to be. I mean, given the deficits we run up, interest rates going up, the cost of the federal debt. I mean, discretionary spending has been under a squeeze, and we just kind of had a free pass when we had a very artificially low interest rate environment for so long. Now we're back into a more normal interest rate environment, and the cost of the debt is much more significant. And so some of this is inevitable. I think it's somewhat good timing. We'll see kind of how it starts to unfold.
Kind of struck me that every time we talk about government efficiency, whether it was during the Reagan administration, the Clinton administration, it tends to be pretty good for government contractors, because ultimately some of this stuff needs to be done. Let's figure out efficiencies to do it less expensively, maybe with fewer people, all that kind of stuff. But government contractors seem to be a part of that solution as opposed to being part of the problem. What do you think of that?
No, I agree. Well, I largely agree with that. I would say there are some that might be, and they would never say this, but they might be a little more kind of staff aug and sort of just, less differentiated from bureaucrats. And again, I don't mean to say civil servants is bad, but I would say, there can be, and I would say they're largely going to be part of the solution. I agree. And so again, especially if they're apt, I mean, it's tough. It's even for contractors like clients we have that are, hey, we're incumbent, and we may be the next program opportunity, we might be using AI. Wow, that could reduce our headcount by 50%. And maybe we don't need, I mean, those are the kind of things that I think we're going to see happening, or we're already seeing happening outside of government. It's tough for a civil servant to make that program. It's like, yeah, I want to do this initiative and it's going to cut my workforce by 50%. It's not easy for contractors either, but they need to do it because they're competing with somebody that's going to offer it, that's going to try to unseat them. So I think contractors are largely going to be part of the solution, and I think they need to be. And I think that's where the expertise is, and it's not a slam on the civil servants, because again, corporate America, I mean, it's a different role. They're charting strategy and policy direction. They're not seeing 10 different clients that are going to all the conferences that the private sector consultants need to do to know what the cutting edge technologies are. So again, I think there's a place for both. And I think largely contractors, again, even though contractors are going to be part of the solution, and as I mentioned, the public companies, they're down 25% still at where they were valuation wise a year ago. But the reason they're down in part is because they're so large now that inevitably part of their portfolio is touching all the agencies. And when you don't have that rising tide that we've had across the whole sector, like we've had over the last 4 years, there's going to be parts of their portfolio which are going to be under pressure, and there's going to be parts that are not. And where the pure plays of, which I think you're going to see more small ball with respect to M&A, where companies that are more pure, 80, 90, 100% safe, kind of enduring programs, capabilities that are, again, part of the solution versus augmentation. I think you're going to see strong M&A in that. But much less of just sort of the buy for scale, because they're not going to want, if I'm a buyer, I don't want to buy more of what I already have if I'm looking at areas that are under pressure. And again, I think there's going to be winners and losers, and I think we don't know exactly who those are now, but we will have a better clarity as the months roll forward in 25.
So, closing question for you, Bob. Assuming that you had a brother who had a GovCon company, what advice would you be telling him or her, I guess brother him, about selling that company? Would you tell them to get started in 25? Would you tell them to wait 6 months? What would you tell them?
Well, I'd say it depends on who, given what we just talked about, it would depend on the profile of the business. But one, I would say interview and hire the best advisors possible. I know you and I share that view that, and it's not
Absolutely.
bankers and M&A firms, it's the right law firms, maybe sometimes the right CPAs. don't be penny wise, pound foolish on likely the largest business transaction of your life. And so, invest the time. You don't need to overpay, but again, don't, if you're dealing in millions of dollars, don't worry about tens of thousands of dollars differential. And then check references on those advisors too. Not everyone, even though they might have names up there on their website, not all those clients had the same experience. And again, even just talking to past sellers who will all be discreet, they've been through that. You'll learn something. And again, so I think it's an educational process, not just helpful in picking the right advisors, and listen to your advisors. And again, so every company it isn't going to be the right time in the first quarter or first half of 2025 for every company to go to market. And so don't err towards picking the advisors that are telling you what you want to hear. Think about it, ask questions. I recently told a new client of ours, enjoy the sale experience. It's going to be painful. It's going to be work, but it's like that PhD. If you have an MBA, it's your PhD. Or if you have an undergraduate, it's your MBA. That's the way Kevin and I looked at our deal back in both in starting the company and in the sale process. It was a learning experience. And so, I would say just listen to the advisors you have and pick the right ones. And so, because there are a lot of great advisors out there, not just KippsDeSanto, and then there are folks that really know the market well, and it's good to synthesize it because it's not going to be quite as easy as it was during the Biden administration.
I completely agree. Find the right advisors and get ready to learn a lot. Bob, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm sure we'll be crossing paths many times this year, and I look forward to it.